also. So we were looking into Six Sigma Black Belt. The first thing, yeah, it's fine, Anuj. I'm doing it now. So as you know, green belt and black belt, we deal with a concept called or methodology called as DMA-IC, right? But the underlying premise for any of the methodologies will be y is equal to f of x. And in this, y is equal to f of x. Y means it is an output and x is input. We can have one input or more than one inputs which can impact our output, or we can also have multiple outputs. So our entire Six Sigma deals with y is equal to f of x. All right. So the first phase that we have discussed about was define phase. In define phase, our entire focus or the tools and techniques that we have deals with how to identify y or how to identify the output. Yeah, we have looked into various techniques, to identify what is your y. And once we identify y, the second key thing would be coming up with a CTQ, critical to quality. Or I would say first thing would be identifying critical to quality. How did we do that? We have looked into voice of customer, voice of business, voice of employee, cost of poor quality. Oh my God. Thank you. So we have looked into voice of customer. We have heard them, what the customer wants. We have heard voice of business. We have heard voice of employees also, and also cost of poor quality. From all these things, we have come up with CTQ, something that is critical to quality. And within CTQ, we have looked into primary CTQ and also secondary CTQ. Sorry for the spelling. After that, we have identified the Y. That is, what is it that we want to improve in the project? By doing Six Sigma project, what is it that we want to improve? Next thing is, we wanted to know where do we stand as of today? We want to improve something, but what is that something as of today? I want to improve my profits. If I have a shop wherein I sell the garments and I want to improve my profits, but what are my profits as of today? I need to know. For that, we have looked into measure phase. In measure phase, we baseline the current performance of the Y which we have identified. How did we do that? We have looked into gauge RNR, and if it is, this is for continuous data. If it is discrete data, we do attribute agreement analysis. Only one thing that you need to remember is wherever the values are greater than 90%, you can straight away accept that measurement system as being very concrete, very robust. If the values are between 70 and 90, you accept it, but you cautiously do so. If it is less than 70%, then you straight away reject that. So define measure phase. If we feel that in the measure phase, the current performance is okay, current performance is, or the measurement system is acceptable because the values are greater than 90%. Then comes the second part. What is the second part? Come up with a data collection plan. What is data collection plan? How do we collect the data? Who is going to collect the data? How much data are you going to collect? All those details. Once you collect the data now and in full length, you use various techniques to baseline the performance. We look into Z value, which is nothing but sigma level. We want to go to some sigma level. Let's suppose my shop garment selling shop, I'm making some profit, which I even before baselining that, I check whether the measurement system is correct or not, whether the accountant who's writing the details in the account sheet is doing a good job or not, right? Is the data accurate or not? If I feel that the data is accurate, I collect the data. Then I try to baseline. I want to implement Six Sigma and improve my profits of garment shop, right? But what is the sigma level that at which I am operating at this point of time? Am I operating at 2 sigma or 3 sigma or 4 sigma or 5 sigma? What sigma level am I operating as of today? And from there, where do I need to go? That is what I need to plan in this. So what I do is I try to measure the Z, that is sigma level. This is one thing. Or I can look into CP, CPK or PP, PPK. CP, CPK is for the sigma level short term. PP, PPK is for the long term. I've told you the difference between short term and long term. Short term means if I do some improvement, for the next 3 months or 4 months, those improvements will be sustainable. Easily you can sustain those. But if I tell you that do some improvement, I want that improvement to be valid for the next 10 years, next 20 years, next 30 years. Next 1 year itself is difficult to sustain the result, right? To sustain the improvement. So if you're speaking in terms of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, 15 years, right? You do improvement once, but if you're telling that improvement should be sustained over a period of longer duration, then you use PPPPK, or you use something called as sigma long term, and you use sigma short term for a short term sigma level. For example, for the next 15 days, for the next 1 month, for the next 3 months, so on and so forth. Yes, so that is what we do in measure phase. So we baseline the current performance of Y. Remember, define and measure phase, both of these phases deal with Y. Right, then we moved on to the analyze phase. What did we do in the analyze phase? In the analyze phase, my bad, 1 second, let me remove that. Okay. In the analyze phase, we try to identify as many X's as possible. So we have identified all the X's potentially possible. What has happened? Anuj, are you able to hear me? Okay, perfect. So we have identified all potential X's. Okay, 1 minute. Yeah, sorry for that. So we have identified all the potential inputs. Once we have identified all the potential inputs, we wanted to identify those inputs which are critical to us. So our job is now to identify the critical inputs. Now, how to identify the critical inputs? For this, we have used something called as hypothesis testing. Based on Y continuous, X discrete, yeah, or based on the other things, we have various hypothesis testing. And I'll not get into the details of hypothesis testing. because in master black belt we will focus majorly on hypothesis testing and regression. So those two we need not again discuss here. So in short, hypothesis testing and regression would form the pillars of your Six Sigma analysis or any analytics for that case. Once we analyze, the output is the list of critical. So as I was discussing, in analyze phase, we have hypothesis testing and also we have regression, right? So these two will be the basis for all of your interviews, for any advanced analytics, right? For getting into data scientist kind of a role, etc. Hypothesis testing and regression will be the focus. These two will be spending significant amount of time in your analyze phase. We'll be discussing about each and every output entry, right? Each and every element of the output we'll be discussing in detail and how to make sense out of that. There'll be a lot of case studies also on that. So in the analyze phase, the output is a list of critical inputs. Then what do we do in the improve phase? In the improve phase, we try to improve the critical inputs. The critical inputs which we have identified in analyze phase, now we try to improve them further because we want the most optimum solution possible. Right? We want the best solution possible. For that, we need to optimize or improve the inputs. So the logic here is that if we focus on our inputs, output will be taken care of. If our output is to be profitable, if that is the output that we want to achieve, we want to be very profitable, then the input could be various things, right? So those inputs, if you focus on those inputs, then your output of achieving the profits will be taken care of. So that is the logic. Always focus on your inputs, on your hard work, on your skills. Your output of getting promoted or getting better salary will be taken care of. That is the improve phase. After that comes the control phase, in which we want to continuously monitor the improved process. In control phase, the logic is to monitor the improved process. In improve phase, we have improved. And how did we improve it? How did we try to arrive at the optimum solution? Using something called as design of experiments. Design of experiments. For example, I have a garment shop. I want to make profits. What is that dependent on? Variety of garments that I have, the cost that is being priced, number of workers, rent which I pay, right? It's dependent on various factors. From between how many hours or from what time to what time will my shop be open. Right? So all these things are going to impact my profits. So your design of experiment says, take 5 workers, right? Pay rent of 1 lakh rupees and have 10 varieties of garments and then see what the sales are. Again, you do another experiment. You say, let me take only 4 laborers or 4 daily workers. Let me pay a rent of 80,000, not more than that. Let me choose a venue which costs me only 80,000. And let me run for 7 days in a week. That is another experiment. Third experiment would be, let me run the show with only 3 workers. Let me pay rent of not more than 70,000. Let me work for only 5 days in a week. This is another experiment. So in this way, you keep doing multiple experiments based on what are your inputs. Whatever your input is, suppose daily labors is one input, one critical input that you have identified, which is going to impact your profits. Then what you do is the daily labors, you try to change the numbers. You'll have only one worker, you'll see what the output is, two workers, what the output is, three workers, what the output is, four workers, what the output is. You increase the number of workers to 5 and see what the output is, right? So if you change only one factor at a time, it is called as OFAT, one factor at a time. But one factor at a time is something that is not acceptable, right? In nowadays, there is not only one factor that's going to impact you. There'll be multiple factors. So your design of experiment always speaks about multiple factors at a time. So just for our understanding, assume that 1x was number of resources, human resources, and another input was number of hours that you work or number of days that you work in a week. In a week, shop is open. Let me put this as x1. Suppose these are the only two inputs that are going to impact my output of making profits, assume. So what design of experiment sees is, first let this be at 5 and let us work for 5 days in a week. Let us see what the output is. This is one experiment. Second experiment, I'll say, I'll increase the resources to 6, right? And let the number of days be 5 only. Let the number of resources be reduced to 4. Let the number of days in a week become 7. So in this way, I do multiple experiments. And if I do each and every experiment that is possible, you call it as, full factorial. If I feel that, I cannot run all the experiments, it's not possible for me. It's very time consuming and I do not have the luxury of running all the experiments for each week and see what the sales will be. It's difficult. My manager will not accept. That is when you do fractional factorial experiment. Instead of running all the experiments, you will run just a few of them and see whether it makes sense or not. You may not always get the optimum solution in fractional factorial, but in full factorial you'll always get. But there is a trade-off always. Full factorial is very costly, very time consuming. Fractional factorial, you can do it quickly, but you need not necessarily arrive at the most optimum solution. You'll arrive at a solution which is the best among the experiments that you have run. So this is what we were doing in proof phase. So suppose this is the data that we have collected. This is the exercise that we were supposed to do. Suppose this is the data that we were given. Now we need to make sense out of this table. What does this entire table say? What is my Y? What are my X's in this? I need to identify. So we have two outputs that we are primarily focusing on. One is yield. Yield means the output, productivity kind of. How many garments is each person selling in my garment shop? That's kind of yield, right? Productivity. How many customers are my workers addressing in a given day? One person might be very slow in explaining. Maybe he'll address only 5 people in a day. Another person might be very, very productive. He might address 10 people in a day. That is your yield, productivity basically. Right? Another thing is, another output that we want to impact is cost. These are the two outputs that I want to impact. Now look at this, very interesting. Primary output is yield, which I want to improve. I want to improve my yield. But while I improve my yield, I want to keep my cost constant. I don't want my operating cost to increase, right? So I want to maintain it constant, or probably I want to reduce it. I want to increase my output productivity by reducing my operational cost. And that is the best solution, right? Anyone can provide. Or at least maintain the cost constant. Cost should not increase. Your productivity increased, good, but your operational cost also increased, bad. For that reason, you also look into what is your secondary why. Okay, don't just always focus on your primary output. Yeah. The second statement says that all. Objective is to maximize the yield with minimal cost, or try to maintain the cost constant. Yeah. Constraints. What could the possible constraints be? Constraints could be secondary why. That means here this is a constraint for me. I do not want to increase the cost, but despite that, I want to increase my yield. I want to maximize my yield, right? By maintaining my cost constant, or even try to reduce the cost. So that is a constraint for me. That is something that is limiting me. Even in your excess, you might have such constraints. This is a critical example. Delivery time I want to reduce the delivery time. However, I do not want to increase the delivery cost. If Flipkart or Amazon or eBay is trying to ship goods to my home, and if they want to reduce the delivery time, they might probably hire more people. If there are more number of people, delivery time can be reduced. That's a wrong solution. If you do so, your delivery cost is going to increase, right? So the challenge is to reduce the delivery time by either maintaining the delivery cost constant, or at least try to reduce or reduce it. Reduce it, or either try to keep it constant. All right. Now let us look into what are the inputs. We have time, temperature, and catalyst. We have time, temperature, and catalyst, which are the inputs. So time, 50 minutes and 20 minutes. Temperature, 200 degree centigrade and 150 degree centigrade, or Fahrenheit maybe. Catalyst, we have A and B. So these three are going to decide on my output, that is yield and cost. How many levels do we have for each one? How many levels do we have for each one? Look at temperature, for example. I have 50 and 20, that's it. So I have two levels. If I include 30 also somewhere here, 30, then I'll have three levels, 50, 20, and 30. So for this time, I have two levels. For temperature, also there are two levels, 200 and 150. I have two levels. For catalyst also I have two levels, A and B. If I add C also here, then there will be three levels. So number of factors are three. X1, X2, X3, there are three factors. How many levels do I have? Two levels. 20, 50, 150, 200, and A. How many center points do I have? Zero. What do you mean by center point? Here it is. Center point means instead of having only temperature at extremes 20 and 50, let me have probably 35, which is a center point. It will tell me whether the line is straight line or is there any curve associated with that. So if the center point is 1 throughout, that means there is no center point actually. Next thing is blocks. There are two blocks of experiments run. right? I will run all these experiments at one go, and I'll run all these experiments as a second set because it's a block. Here I have a block of 1, here I have a block of 2. So I run in blocks, in groups, basically. Is this randomized? Is this experiment randomized? It should always be randomized, by the way. Is this experiment randomized? How do we come to know? If we look at the standard order and if we look at the run order, this is a standard order actually. Look at this, these are jumbled actually. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in that way, right? We have 4, 3, 8, 6, 1 and all that. So fourth experiment is run first, third experiment is run second, eighth experiment is run third. Here if for example 12th experiment is run 9th, 10th experiment is run 13th, right? So this is randomized. The experiment that we have just conducted is called as randomized experiment. Yeah, so Anuj, do you want me to continue? I can continue. All right, sure, no problem. So that is how you'll have to analyze the DOE inputs that are given to you. Okay, that is all about full factorial design. Then what is fractional factorial design? As I've told you, if you do not have money, time, energy to run all the experiments, you go with fractional factorial design. Conducting experiments always adds time and cost to the company. If you have 10 factors, the number of experiments would be 1024. 1024, how am I getting? 2 raised to the power 10. Simple. Right? If I have 10 factors, then 2 raised to the power 10 would be the number of experiments that would be conducted. Out of this, 938, or sorry, 968 of the experiments provide you three-way or higher interactions. That means if I have 3 inputs here, right? I have I have time, temperature and catalyst. I have 3. Three-way interaction means I'll see all 3 in tandem. I'll see time, temperature and catalyst. I'll see all 3. This is called as three-way interaction. I combine all 3 and see what is the interaction effect. That means if I use say 50 minutes and use 150 degrees centigrade with the catalyst B, then what will happen? So that is called as three-way interaction or higher interactions. Effect of higher order interactions is normally not so significant. It's not so significant, right? It will give you some information, but it's not very significant. With slight compromise on information, a reliable prediction equation can be obtained with lesser number of runs. Yes. So probably with what 56, right? If I subtract 1024 from 968, I'll get 56. Probably with 56 experiments, I can get some meaningful prediction equation which says that this is how you need to use your inputs to obtain optimum output. 1 by n fractional factorial design of experiment is run where the number of experiments are reduced by 1 by n depending on the requirement. So 1 by 2 fractional factorial design has half the number of experiments as in full factorial. 1 by 4 has 1/4 the number of experiments as in a full factorial. So in this way, you can reduce the number of experiments, which reduces the time and cost for the company, And once your number of experiments are reduced, though you're slightly compromising on the information, you still get some kind of reliable prediction equation. Yeah. What is confounding in fractional factorial design? In a fractional design, okay, sure, Anush.